Hello and welcome, my filthy little hobbitses, to another riddle-filled episode of What Happened, the show that walks and walks and walks to find the unexpected mysteries of pop culture history, and today's epic tale is no exception. If someone hears the name Gollum, typically the last thing they think of is, hey, how come there's no dedicated video game for that guy? I'd love to play as that selfless, valiant hero. Well, someone actually answered that question nobody asked with an action-adventure stealth game which, not to be dramatic, wound up being one of the worst things released this year. And today we're gonna find out the whys and the hows. So put on your most soiled loincloth and your shiniest precious as I answer the question, what happened to the Lord of the Rings, Gollum? It all starts with a hole in the ground, but this wasn't a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with worms and oozy smells, but in fact a German studio by the name of Daedalic Entertainment, who specialized in strategy and adventure titles, more recent examples being Pillars of the Earth and State of Mind. Why do I remember seeing this cover art everywhere for a while? Anyway, they were very much an under-the-radar style company. That is, until late March of 2019, when they did pop up on a lot of people's radars with the announcement that they had acquired the rights to both develop and publish a new game based on the venerated Lord of the Rings franchise, which was far and away the biggest license they had ever worked on.
Sweet!
But what was even more curious was the subject matter, which saw players becoming the rag-wearing, ring-bearing, fish-tearing, tricksy son of a gun, Gollum, which was, certainly a choice. Traditionally, Lord of the Rings games were all about inhabiting the boots of, the heroes. Aragorn, Bilbo, Gandalf, Gronkemir here, and whatever this dude's name was. That's because, for something like 12 years, video games based on Middle-earth were controlled by two of the biggest publishers in the industry, EA and Warner Bros., which is why you mostly saw straightforward action games that took very little in the way of risks. Not only that, the rights to adapt The Lord of the Rings into other mediums were separated into two distinct camps, the Jacksonverse or the more book-accurate Tolkienverse, which produced titles like The Lord of the Rings Online or that old PS2 Hobbit game everyone seems to have rented at least once.
Burglar! Thieving Lake Man!
But when Warner Bros. Had finished with the Hobbit trilogy, there seemed to be very little interest to, keep mining Moria for more potential products. So it was looking like there would be a perfect lull in which to release more non-Jacksonverse games, with Daedalic being first in line to do so. In Gollum's initial press release, CEO and co-founder Karsten Fishelman stated, "The Lord of the Rings is one of the most epic and renowned stories of all time. It's an honor for us to have the opportunity to work on our own contribution to this universe. At a time when the games industry is undergoing structural changes and seeing new business models evolve, we are excited to realize a huge new production based on a story that has stayed fresh and relevant for more than 60 years." It certainly was a big project for Daedalic. It was a huge property in a genre they had little experience in, had to deliver on 6 different platforms, all the while having a headcount between 70 and 100 full-time employees. That's not a terrible workforce if you're shipping, say, a really ambitious big indie title, but for what Daedalic were planning and promising, it was more on the conservative side. So do try to be shocked when I tell you that their initial ambitions for Gollum were quite a good deal grander than what we eventually wound up with one of those ambitions being to finish the game by 2021, something that they were a little bit off by. As for Middle-earth Enterprises, who handled the licensing for all non-Jacksonverse projects, well, they seemed all gung-ho about this partnership as well, saying they were working very closely with Daedalic and that once Gollum was completed, they planned to develop multiple other Lord of the Rings projects together, which, I hope nobody started holding their breath for those, because as we'll see, they are never coming out. Throughout 2020, Gollum received few incremental updates, such as a brief CGI-only trailer whose lone highlight was showing a shot of Mount Doom and then the logo. In interviews, the game's project manager, Said Haberstroh, would describe some of the game's mechanics via concept screenshots, such as the dialogue choices that Gollum would need to grapple with. As a player, you have to manifest a choice. Instead of just choosing, you have to press a button multiple times to manifest your option. But the dialogue options are also flying around the screen, so it's not that easy. It can happen that sometimes a player has another outcome than expected if they fail the minigame, but this is also dependent on the choices the player made before, whether the player is more on Gollum or Smeagol's side, making some options easier or harder to get. This essentially made it so that the player would need to interact a little more to get the dialogue choices they wanted, which, when framed against the ideal of Gollum's dueling personalities, was a pretty neat idea, and sadly one that would ultimately be handled very differently in the finished product. But it wasn't only that though. Throughout 2020, there was made mention that Gollum would feature a certain amount of climbing and/or platforming, which made sense given the character was pretty agile and there's a lot of climbing and scampering in Lord of the Rings. Turns out these mechanics also started off far more ambitiously on the outset of the project, as the team wanted something closer to the climb anywhere navigation style of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was a direct influence. It's unclear how long Daedalic went down this path, but considering their general pool of experience lied with adventure and strategy games, and the complexity of implementing such a system meant that the whole thing was eventually abandoned, again opting for something far, far more stripped down. So, perhaps due to the issues with the unused climbing system and re-examining the scope of the development as a whole, the first public instance of things not going very smoothly with Gollum were made apparent in January of 2021, where it received its first and lengthiest delay. The project would need an entire extra year and would now release in 2022, but this news was also paired with another announcement. Nacon signed on as an additional partner and would now be co-publishing the game with Daedalic, but the deal went far deeper than that, as Nacon would go on to purchase them outright later that same year for a cool $60 million, which I guess means they were really impressed with Gollum at that point. In 2021, Saul Zaentz Co., the original movie rights owners for The Lord of the Rings and the owners of Middle-earth Enterprises, raised a legal stink that since Warner Bros. Was no longer actively developing new projects based on the franchise, all the rights should revert back to them. This eventually did happen and is part of a bigger story I'm going to be looping back around on in a little bit. Actually, let's loop back around on that right now, because throughout the vast majority of 2021, the Gollum team were hunkering down, dealing with logistical issues brought on by the pandemic, and trying their best to rescope and simplify their once ambitious aspirations. So, February 2022. Rumors started swirling that Saul Zaentz Co. were looking to sell Lord of the Rings in general, including Middle-earth Enterprises, to the highest bidder. For a good long while, it seemed like the front-runners were Amazon or even Warner Brothers, but swerve! It actually fell into the rapidly expanding and sometimes shrinking hands of the Embracer Group, which occurred later on in August of 2022. Yeah, in case some of you somehow missed that, the Embracer Group now owns every single licensing right to The Lord of the Rings, which includes board games, theme parks, merch, video games, movies, etc. So remember, from now on, if you want to see the likes of Ungoliant, Wormtongue, or fucking Kellogg's Blueberry in anything, Embracer Group has to give the say-so. So yeah, dark clouds were circling over the entirety of Middle-earth no matter where you looked. But fortunately, Daedalic were able to finally break their almost year-long silence in May of 2022, when they announced that Gollum would finally slink into stores on September 22nd, even nailing down the exact day. It was also officially announced it would launch on Steam, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S, Xbox Series X, and even on the Nintendo Switch. This brand new shiny release date, however, would only last about 2 months before there was yet another delay, which brings us to the gloomiest time for the project, as it was quickly filling up with all manner of devilry. So, despite Nacon and Daedalic nailing down the game's release to the very day, Gollum slipped by a concerningly vague few months, with neither company even willing to commit to a specific year. So it took until March of 2023 before the silence was broken once again with a final release date of May 25th, along with a new story trailer which raised the eyebrows of many a fan. This is because, with only a few months left before the game's launch, footage of actual gameplay was still quite rare, with this trailer being a great example as it only offered a few brief snippets. This uncertainty wasn't a new thing though, because there always seemed to be this hesitation by fans to fully embrace the idea of a game centering around the character, as many felt the little guy already had quite a fleshed out arc between all the books and movies, and that a Gollum game was a bit superfluous.
That's enough, Gollum.
Piece of circus, you stupid fat with-faced f***ing turd!
Now, even if you were to just break this character down on a visual level, just look at him. He's gaunt, bald, has poor oral hygiene, talks funny, and is a pretty unhealthy looking color. Oh, and speaking of all those things, check the link in the description or the pinned comment below for the limited edition Matt McFighter plushie campaign, which is being done by my friends over at Makeship. Buy one now or go to hell. Anyway, coming hot off the nothing from that scintillating story trailer, Gollum was dealt a few more black eyes. The first of these was the Precious Edition, or, the premium package of the game, which contained a few extras. This package drew additional ire from fans, as one of those extras was more Sindarin dialogue, a feature that needed a bit more clarification than the space offered on a typical GameStop pre-order page. What this was more NPC chatter that was authentically acted in the Elvish dialect, and Daedalic thought that, due to the specific extra cost of hiring these trained actors, making this feature paid content for Tolkien superfans made sense. Regardless, said Tolkien superfans still grumbled about this online, and that wasn't even everything regarding the Precious Edition. There was a lot of confusion and misinformation regarding the exclusive emotes that were included in the package as well, because some people thought the My Precious emote, along with the name of the premium edition itself, to mean that Gollum would not actually say those magic words if they bought the standard version of the game. This simply wasn't true in the end, of course, as it was just fans misreading the description of the extra bonus content, but I'm including it here because it's funny. The second snafu was a bit more damaging. The entirety of the game was spoiled on YouTube a few days before its official launch, with a full playthrough being uploaded and viewable for several hours before it, and the channel that uploaded it, was nuked off the platform. I can't imagine this spurred anyone to buy Gollum, judging by the reaction this video got on other social media channels, but at least it was taken down reasonably quickly. From this footage, it was pretty apparent though that Daedalic had cut a lot of corners to get the game in a shippable state, and even then, that's a generous descriptor. But there really wasn't much use in hiding it though, because only one day after the game was released to some, or should I say, universally savage reviews from both critics and fans, Daedalic issued a press release apologizing for the state the game was in, which was, quite the state. Now, it's one thing to issue an apology if you had a bit of a rough launch, but it's another thing altogether when you actually wound up producing the worst reviewed game of 2023. At least for a few months. But all of Gollum's problems, from the bugs to the inconsequential story, simplistic puzzles, spotty performance, and ugly textures and models, none of these things would get a chance to be improved upon, because in late June, Daedalic announced they're completely shutting down their entire development arm, laying off roughly 25 staff members with the hopes to relocate the remainder elsewhere under the Nacon umbrella. Now, this has to be a record. An entire team being let go after releasing the product in question after only 1 month? And I thought the studios behind Final Fight Streetwise or 007 Legends had quick deaths. That all being said, it seemed at least some people were morbidly curious in Gollum leading into its launch, with it being wishlisted around 250,000 times on Steam, but eventually only selling a fraction of those numbers with roughly 10,000 digital sales, according to Steam statistics. And while it did enter the UK charts in its debut week at a respectable number 6, it completely bottomed out and didn't even make the top 40 the following week, and never made an appearance on the NPD charts either. The bad news kept rolling though, because not only were Daedalic closing up shop, they decided, fuck it, why not reveal that a completely different and up to that point unannounced Lord of the Rings project was also being cancelled. Now, since nothing else was officially revealed about this mysterious game, there were some conflicting reports about what it was all about. Reportedly, Nacon and Daedalic were able to score a €2 million grant from the German government to help fund its production, but beyond that, we know very little. Rumors ranged from it being a straight-up sequel to Gollum, which wouldn't make much narrative sense, to it revolving exclusively around wizards due to its apparent codename of It's Magic. As you'd expect though, news on the Gollum front remained pretty quiet. That is, until this past October, when German news outlet Game2 were able to speak to 30 former staff members at Daedalic, who painted a rather grim picture of the game's production. Some of these details included Gollum's total budget, which was reportedly only €15 million, which was a pittance when compared to many AAA productions, a situation Daedalic actively tried and failed to improve. They apparently made 3 separate attempts to seek additional funding to increase the game's production value and the workforce behind it, but all these pleas to unnamed sources for additional cash were all rejected. This is what eventually led to a lot of their gameplay ideas like the climbing getting simplified, but also included other elements like companions, which were originally intended to be much more elaborate and frequent. Then there was that dialogue system, which dropped the manifesting aspect Daedalic spoke about in 2020 and was replaced with players having to convince Gollum and win arguments with him just to pick certain narrative decisions, which, while much more arbitrary and random, at least became a meme for like a week. The intent to feature a compelling narrative filled with meaningful interactions and relationships were also dashed, because they had to be stripped down to mere in-game moments where Gollum's character model simply stands around or follows NPCs who then exposit dialogue, rather than there being, choreographed and dynamic cutscenes, as originally envisioned. Also, remember that last big delay from September 2022 to May 2023? Internally, that was seen by pretty much everyone at Daedalic as a desperate and pointless move to salvage a project that many already felt was, and I quote, a total loss. This stacked a morale debuff on top of the low morale they already had. This was because the entire team were perpetually always on edge, due in part to the hostile environment reportedly fostered by Daedalic's CEO and COO, with many employees conducting business in ushered tones so as not to anger the 2 higher-ups, who allegedly would verbally berate anyone beneath them. It should be noted that since this report came out, Daedalic took special care to address this particular claim, maintaining that they've always fostered a friendly working atmosphere, which, I don't know, press X to doubt on that, because it seems the higher-ups are already doing some pretty shady shit on the regular. One such example was the public apology, which former Daedalic employees were quite adamant was both tricksy and false. Even though it seemed to be issued on behalf of Daedalic, staff told Game2 that the apology didn't come from them, and they weren't even aware it was being sent out. They instead alleged it was written by Nacon, and when I say written, I mean generated by ChatGPT. The misspelling of the name Lord of the Ring and the statement's vague language and lack of concrete details are kind of red flags, but this has never been officially proven, so the jury's still out on that one. Now, I'm just gonna come right out and say it, this was pretty much a disaster waiting to happen. Daedalic simply weren't the right studio to make this style of game, with this license, and with the minuscule budget and workforce they had available. And hell, even the core idea itself was kind of ill-advised. While I'm sure many on the team wanted Gollum to be a success and worked tirelessly towards that goal, project leaders need to have a strong vision that everyone can stick to, and the necessary funds and manpower in order to make it happen. Now, while Daedalic currently still exist as a publisher, I wouldn't be surprised if they get folded and absorbed into Nacon fully at some point.
But why does it think this, Precious?
I don't know, it's just really likely. They got rid of most of their employees months ago, so yeah, they're just kind of a name now.
But it knows nothing about gaming industry, just a fat YouTuber it is.
I mean, true, yeah, but I've been doing this show for a few years, so I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about.
No, it doesn't. It's a liar. Nobody likes you.
Oh, damn. If you're aware of any other epic tales from the video game, movie, or literary industries, do let me know in the comments below, or enter the Hobbit hole that is my social media. See you next time, Preciouses, and thanks for watching!